The causes behind the American Revolution are debatable. It's not as simple as someone got shot and then people started fighting. Many events led up to and influenced the revolution, but we believe the top 5 events are, in chronological order, the Stamp Act, the Boston Massacre, the Tea Act, the Coercive Act / the Intolerable Acts, and Thomas Paine's Common Sense.
The first cause of the revolution that we are going to discuss is the Stamp Act. This act was implemented in 1765 and required colonists to purchase stamps for paper products, including wills, licenses, deeds, playing cards, newspapers, etc. The Stamp Act was the first direct tax in the colonies, so the colonists noticed the tax more than if it was indirect, leading to more discontent. The tax also affected the wealthy population more than the poor, and because of this, there was a more rebellious activity in response to this act than some others, since the rich had a larger influence in colonial society and government. This act caused more problems than any other act that led to the revolution, and it began the downside of British colonial relations. It also brought about the idea of no taxation without actual representation, which was a major revolutionary idea throughout the colonies.
Okay. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the Boston Massacre. So the second major influence of the American Revolution was the Boston Massacre. In 1770, for the first time, British soldiers directly fired into a crowd of colonists. In reality, the massacre occurred after the colonists threw snowballs and threatened the British soldiers with clubs, provoking them into firing to protect themselves. In total, only 5 colonists were killed and several more were wounded. This event was very important in leading up to the revolution, not because of the actual events, but because of the propaganda that was created out of those events. Paul Revere produced a very biased engraving of the event, which gave the colonists a false impression of what actually happened. It portrayed British soldiers as guilty and cruel, while the mob was seen as being completely innocent. Because this engraving was so publicized in such a biased way, it had a large influence in rallying up the colonists in an anti-British mindset that later played a role in preparing them for the revolution. After this event, many colonists saw the British as the enemy rather than the mother country, which effectively distanced them from the British relatives and planted a seed of rebellion. Just keep on.
Our third influence to the revolution is the Tea Act. This act was released in 1773 and actually repealed the hated 3-cent tax on tea. But along with this repeal, this act gave a monopoly on tea to the British East India Company. This monopoly angered many colonists and caused them to worry about other potential monopolies that the British government could award to companies without their say. The monopoly even put some merchants out of business. Again, the act brought up the idea of representation in government. This event directly led to the mass boycotting of tea, the Eatonton Tea Party, and most famously, the Boston Tea Party. The colonists saw the Tea Act as another infringement of their freedoms, which is why it led to such rebellion.
The next act we're going to talk about is the Coercive Act / Intolerable Acts. The fourth major influence to the American Revolution is a series of acts called the Coercive Acts or Intolerable Acts, as they were called in the colonies. In 1774, after the Boston Tea Party, England was very upset. The colonists had openly defied the British, and this not only made the British angry, it's scared them about what the colonies might do. There were 4 parts to these acts. Boston Port Act. The first part of the Intolerable Acts is the Boston Port Act. This act closed the port of Boston as a punishment directed at the Sons of Liberty who participated in the Boston Tea Party. It is extremely detrimental to Boston's economy as it completely cut them off from trade. Through this act, England was limiting the colony's economic freedom, and the colonists were not happy about it. The second act was the Massachusetts Government Act. The second part of this series of acts was the Massachusetts Government Act. This took away the Massachusetts Charter, which effectively placed Massachusetts, Boston in particular, under martial law and took away all self-governing bodies in the colony. The colonists viewed this as a loss of another freedom. They lost the right to make their own laws, which was added to a long list of freedoms that England had taken away. The third part of the Coercive Acts was the Administration of Justice Act, which allowed the governor to hold trials outside of the colonies if he thought that justice could not be achieved inside the colony due to prejudicial views on the British or favoring the colonists. To the colonists, this felt like a personal attack on their judgment. They were losing the ability and the right to have a jury of their peers. The fourth and final part of the Coercive Acts was the Quartering Act. This act dramatically increased the number of troops that had to be quartered in Massachusetts, Boston in particular. The colonists felt that they should not be required to take care of soldiers until this was another violation of their rights. The Coercive Acts were seen by the colonists as a series of oppressive acts that sought to take away many colonists' natural rights. As evidenced by the name Intolerable Acts, the colonists felt that this oppression was intolerable, which convinced many colonists that they needed to break away from England's tyranny.
The fifth and final major influence of the Revolution was Thomas Paine's Common Sense, released in January of 1776. This pamphlet really changed people's minds in favor of the Revolution because it argued for the breaking away from the British monarchy and said that it was unnatural for a huge mass of land, like the colonies, to be ruled by such a tiny nation as Britain. Thomas Paine was the first person to openly ask for independence, and his writing style was simple enough that it could be read by a wide variety of people. This rallied large numbers of people to the revolutionary cause. Paine believed that the sole role of government was to protect citizens' rights and that government should be judged based on that role. His pamphlet, Thomas Common sense was the final major influence in events leading up to the revolution. It confirmed that yes, revolution was reasonable and should take place to overthrow such an oppressive and tyrannical government.
The events that caused the American Revolution are very debatable. Some might argue that the French and Indian War was more important than any other event, but the truth is many events contributed to the revolution. The War for Independence was inevitable, and we are living proof of its effects today. Therefore, we believe that the 5 most influential causes to the revolution are the Stamp Act, the Boston Massacre, the Tea Act, the Intolerable Acts, and Common Sense by Thomas Paine.